Welcome into the final edition of the Hot Read Podcast, live from the 2024 NFL Combine. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, Director of Published Content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network, and you can follow me on social media at Easton Freeze. I am joined on this Saturday by producer JT. You can follow on social media at JT_Ruhnke. JT, we just watched some fellas fly on the field at Lucas Oil Stadium. How are you?
I'm tired, but excited because we got to see a lot of action out there. It's also a Saturday, and looking at it right now, what are people doing? It's an early Saturday evening, and they're here watching Combine content.
Right?
Like, what are we doing here?
The NFL's king. We're all sick in the head.
Thank you for being here with us on our last episode. But yeah, we just wrapped up. We literally set the show for 5:30 Central, and then Xavier Worthy came out, and we had to stay for that because
we were packed up ready to go, and it's like, okay, well, guess we got to stay. The show can wait a little bit. Xavier Worthy, of course, just moments ago broke the Combine record for fastest 40 time, 4.21, breaking John Ross's record. Whether or not that's going to make him a good NFL receiver is something we'll talk about a little bit later today, but we've got a great show for you today. We saved the best for last. We're talking offensive linemen after they were at the podiums this morning. I was not there for that because I woke up with my throat on fire. I was sick. I felt horrible. Producer JT, being the trooper that he is, put on J in JT stood for journalism today. Big J Journo JT went to the meetings this morning, spoke to a ton of linemen, got all that content for you. So essentially the first 15, 20 minutes of today's show, I'm going to be interviewing JT about what exactly he saw and heard, what his thoughts were on some of these guys that may be future Tennessee Titans. Then we've got some clips from our interview yesterday with Trevor Sikkema, the head of draft content over at PFF, a phenomenal conversation with him on some draft philosophy, what he would do at number 7 for the Titans, whether that is wide receiver or looking at the tackle position, and talking about some tackles later on in the draft, not named Joe Alt or Olu Fashanu, who we learned today. That is officially how you say his name, Fashanu or Fashanu? Is it Fashanu or Fashanu? Fashanu, I think.
Fashanu.
Fashanu. So
yes.
Like fashion. Ooh, okay, that's easy. That's all you got to remember. It's like fashion. Fashanu, not Fashanu, not Fashanu, Fashanu. There are other guys not named those two fellas in the draft. And if the Titans do go playmaker at number 7, they're probably going to be in the market for some tackle help later on in the draft. And we talked through with Trevor some guys that may be available in round 2 and later on. And then finally, we'll get to some of the testing numbers and results from today's athletic testing at Lucas Oil Stadium here in Indianapolis, where we just were, some thoughts on what we saw and heard and what was the main event for athletic testing. You got the quarterbacks out there, the wide receivers out there. It's easily the most attended by the public. It's actually a pretty surprising atmosphere of fans in attendance, and it's a good time. And we saw some guys that certainly you would assume at least one or two of these fellas is going to be in two-tone blue next year. So a lot to cover today. Before we dive into all of it, do us a couple of favors. First of all, if you're with us live, thank you very much for being here on a Saturday. We appreciate you. 2 quick things you can do for us. 1, if you're watching on Twitter or on Facebook, head on over to Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. It's Broadway Sports Media on YouTube. Find this live stream, and in the comment section of that live stream is where you can be a part of today's conversation, like Kenneth and Sean and Derek already are. Appreciate you guys being here. Sean asking if JT's back hurts. I'd imagine it does. He carried me today. There is no doubt about it. And
Kenneth, yes, we did.
What was the question from Kenneth?
He said, did you witness history? We did.
We did.
And you were the one this week. If there's anything I learned from the NFL Combine experience this week, it's how to ride a Lime scooter. And how effective it is. And so that's what we did. We rode Lime scooters back from
our Airbnb is probably
a
mile and a half away from Lucas Oil. We got here in like 7 minutes because we just zipped on over here because we had to, because we were running late. Okay, so make sure you're watching on YouTube. And then while you're there, hit subscribe for us. It is very easy to subscribe. Just hit it. That's the button right underneath the video. It's free to you. It's very helpful to us. Thank you for doing that. We're trying to get that subscriber count up as much as possible. And then send the link to a buddy. Hit like, hit retweet, whatever you can do to help us promote this live product. Get as many live eyeballs on it as possible would be very appreciated as well. All right, JT, let's dive into my interview of you, of what you saw and heard this morning from the offensive linemen. You want to start with the 2 top guys that will be likely top 10, maybe top 15 picks. Ola Fashanu and Joe Alt. You heard from both of them this morning. Maybe compare and contrast what those 2 guys had to say. you came to me when we finally met up today, and after I drug myself up on Advil and felt a little bit better, and you said, man, if the Titans draft Joe Alt, it is going to be just the saltine cracker, blandest personality right there on that left side with Peter Skoronski and Joe Alt. Is he just a Peter Skoronski personality clone?
I mean, it can be taken that way. They're the two top offensive linemen at the time. They were the two offensive tackles of the Big Ten. And you're kind of getting the same cookie cutter mold of tackle, or not Big Ten, but like in that area, the Midwestern.
Right, the Midwest.
The Midwestern.
Olu's the one who was the actual Big Ten tackle of the year.
Yes.
So all three of them are connected in that way.
Yeah, but if you're looking for a Midwestern white boy tackle who's going to, and it's not just my opinion of that.
Sure.
Everyone, all of Titans media was like, well, we're not, if the Titans were to draft Joe Alt, don't expect any big hits from him from interviews for
the
sure.
The offensive line performance stock is up, but the quotes stock is way down.
And that's not a knock on him. He's just, he brings an aura of preparedness that you basically, when you talk to him, you're basically already talking to an NFL player. It's not trying to unpack the layers of this player and meet the kind of guy that he can be at the next level. He's been preparing for this for a long time.
You don't feel like you're talking to a kid.
Exactly.
You feel like you're talking to a veteran.
I think the most interesting thing was kind of just talking about how he transitioned from being a tight end early in his football playing career, that athleticism that he was able to continue to keep as he said his body grew, as he kept getting bigger. And
kind of forced into that position a little bit, right?
He was forced into it. He knew that's where he belonged. So just kind of using that versatility there in the athleticism that he took from being a tight end. He's a really competitive Uno player. He loves to play Uno, apparently.
Awesome. That's great to know. Okay.
Maybe down the line, if he is a Titan, we'll have to get his official rule set.
I'll challenge him to right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Can you stack +2s? Can you stack +4s?
So Joe says that he was under the assumption that you could.
I think you should be able to.
Found out that is not how that works.
Well, the Uno, big Uno doesn't want you doing it, but
exactly.
We appreciate the game. We'll take the rules from here is my approach to it.
Exactly. I mean, he's just a stand-up guy. He's a stand-up player. You're not getting an eccentric personality like you don't like with Peter Skoronski. You didn't get an eccentric.
You're not getting Taylor Lewan at the left tackle position if the Titans were to draft him. It's so funny you bring up that Midwestern ethos, that veteran presence that he seems to have. It reminds me honestly of draft night last year on Thursday night. The Titans draft Peter Skoronski at 11, and the camera pans to him in a pizza parlor in the middle of the Midwest, somewhere in Chicago, I think, where he's from, in Chicago, like hugging his friends and family. The least ritzy draft party of a top 15 pick that we saw all night. Like that seems to line up entirely. And then with Fashanu, he seemed a little bit more animated in his responses, but was it kind of a lot of the same from him?
You could tell that he's a smart guy. And not to say Joe Alt isn't a smart guy.
Dumb oaf. Yeah.
Not to say that he isn't smart. Just what Olu brings is a lot more intention in his answers that he gave us today, kind of breaking things down for you as you went in your questions. And you can just tell that he's very smart football wise, and he uses that to his advantage. Another interesting thing, which the media, as he was answering questions, kind of took it away and just kind of ran with this thing.
Mm-hmm.
He went to high school with Caleb Williams,
okay,
which was very interesting.
Yeah.
And of course,
do you know where in the country that is? Washington? I guess they're Washington kids, right? Because Caleb Williams is a Washington kid.
Somewhere on the West Coast.
On the West Coast. Okay, just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think. I'm not actually sure.
I think it's Washington,
Washington
D.C. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I think that they're Washington kids, but I could be wrong.
He was just talking about that. Not a lot of answers there. I just thought that was pretty interesting.
Sure.
But he had some interesting answers to how his big thing is that how he's being described lately in this draft is that it's the athletic upside that he can bring.
Right.
And he kind of challenged that
today,
which I thought was very interesting. Just saying that he is more than just that high athleticism, because he lets the tape kind of show for itself that he can compete and be consistent at a high level, and it's not just something that you have to tap into.
But the technique's already there. He's not this raw athletic product.
And so with a guy like him, if the Titans were to bring him in, It's so weird, right? Because you know what it's kind of like he's the one that you don't know what you're getting. And it feels like, I don't know if you get this way, but like if the Titans, if the wide receivers are gone and Joe Alt and Olu are there at 7 and they would take Olu over Alt, I understand it, but you feel kind of a little bit empty inside still because you're missing that.
How much of that is narrative driven though? That's my question. Is we fall into this trap of the household name, the guy that's talked about as this is clearly the tackle one in the class, whether or not you want to form your own opinion on that or not. It takes a mental rewiring a little bit to be like, I'm very happy with this guy, and he may very well be the guy that I prefer here. Derek in the comments says now pronounce his first name. Olamuyua? Olamuyua,
I'm gonna be honest.
Olamuyua? I think it's my best guess.
I was tuned out to his first name, focusing on the second part of his
Olu is what we're going
name.
with. We're sticking with Olu.
But he said it and then said, but I go by Olu. I always go by Olu. Everyone
perfect, because that's what we're calling him, whether he likes it or not, unfortunately.
For sure.
Can we move on from those two guys? Because you spoke to some other guys that may very well be on the Titans. I would imagine they are on the Titans' radar, may very well be future Titans. And the first one I found fascinating just because of the connection. Scott Fuchs.
It's like books.
Fuchs.
You could say it
F-U-C-H. There are multiple.
There are better ways.
You could say it like Fuchs. There's obviously the profane way of saying the word, which is funny, but I don't think it's correct. It's Fuchs.
So I went with Fuchs today, and the guy we're about to talk to from Kansas said it back to me that way. So that kind of confirms.
So it's like Norfolk, Virginia, kind of in that way. Let's roll with that until Scott himself corrects us. But Scott Fuchs is a guy that is now on the Titans staff as the assistant offensive line coach, has I think 30 plus years of experience at the college level, coming from Kansas, where he has a really phenomenal track record with the offensive line program over there with Kansas football, never coached at the NFL level. And so Brian Callahan brought in Scott Fuchs for his father, Bill Callahan, the Titans offensive line coach. There we go. And those two guys are tag teaming what is a very strong attempt to revitalize the offensive line brand in the Tennessee Titans organization, which it obviously desperately needs. And Dominic Pooney is a guy that is in this class, is I believe primarily a center is his main role, or is he got center guard versatility?
He played tackle in, I believe he played tackle in college.
Sure.
However, as we saw today, kind of teams roll out for tomorrow. They always request to see if you want to maybe have you play and do drills for a different position.
Right.
And Pooney was one of those guys who a lot of teams requested to be maybe looked at for center. So,
okay.
But he also answered that question that he has a lot of versatility, is fine playing wherever on the line. He's a really interesting one who I believe would be there early day 3. So around that
I'll double check
maybe
on that real quick.
100 range or somewhere around that. He would be, if the Titans were to kind of go, as we've talked about all week, if they were to get a absolute stud wide receiver with the first overall pick, or their first overall pick, and then go best player available with maybe like a Chop Robinson if he's there, a Darius Robinson, a Kamari Lassiter in the second round, you could find value in a Dominic Pooney later in the draft if you want to maybe try to bridge the gap between the left tackle position right now with maybe some free agency.
Right. And he's number 87 on the consensus board right now, which, a day 3 guy, potentially he slips into that early day 4 range where the Titans will be picking right now.
Round 3 or round 4.
What did I just say?
There's no day 4 of the draft.
I said day 4. Yeah, day 4 is UDFA day. You don't want to be on day 4. Round 4. Yes, absolutely. And so he's somebody to keep on your radar, not just as a talented player, but again, because of that connection.
And I want to talk to that connection real quick, because I think there is a little bit more to this that I think, and Pooney was gracious enough to continue to talk to that. I asked him about how his experience with Fuchs over the time. Scott Fuchs is a guy who kind of turned that Kansas team around and made them one of the best running teams in the Big 12 through that offensive line.
Well, Kansas football had been horrendous forever. And Fuchs was a big part of them being surprisingly good and entertaining the past couple of years.
And so I asked him, and Pooney said that he's been a tremendous help to his game and just kind of through watching tape and technique and things like that. And so then I continued up and I'm like, well, now he said with full confidence, he has no questions about his ability to translate his coaching in his skills to the NFL level in a coaching room. And I continued that question with, he's going to maybe coach with one of the best, if not the best, offensive line coaches ever. Just talk a little bit about that and how those two will work together. And Pooney gave me an answer that he said they're just in the realm of, it wasn't exactly like this, but it's a force multiplier. And I think he noted that Pooney and Bill have and are still very close friends. And talk a lot through the season as well.
Sure.
So and this is all speculation. I'm not reporting anything like this, but you do have to wonder if by bringing in Fuchs here, who is a little younger than Bill Callahan, could it be potentially setting up for post Bill Callahan?
100%. Yes. Grooming him to be that guy.
I think that's a really interesting thing. And the Titans may already have their life after Bill Callahan on the roster here.
Now, if the Titans go tackle in the second round because they go with a receiver in the first round, for example, at that 38 overall pick, there are a couple of guys that are commonly mocked to be available right there. Guys that are talented enough in other drafts potentially to be first round picks, but because of the depth at the top of this tackle class, pushed out just a hair to the benefit of teams like the Titans that could really use one. One of those guys is Patrick Paul, who we saw at the Senior Bowl a couple of weeks ago. You spoke to him this morning about what makes him stand out from the rest of the field. What was your impression of Paul during his interview?
Big size, like
big fella.
He is a big fella. His arm length is just what kind of sets him apart. And we've been talking about this the entire time since we started kind of covering this class when we saw him at the Senior Bowl. Same thing. He has that arm length that allows him to anchor very, very well. And I think that's a really interesting idea there. If you do go wide receiver, I think that if there was a guy that you wanted to, there's two guys I think that I would really start looking at as the two guys that I would prefer to take in the second round there. If you're looking tackle in the second round, Patrick Paul is one of them. And another one that I talked to today that we'll get to, Kingsley Suamataia, is another one who I think they're kind of two different kind of flavors there, where Patrick Paul is the long, lanky guy who is kind of banking on that. And Kingsley Suamataia, I believe he's out of BYU. I get him mixed up with that one and the Yale prospect.
Yeah, fair enough.
But out of BYU, who kind of currently relies on raw athleticism in his game. And I think that's two different flavors that would be really interesting for Scott Fuchs and also Bill Callahan to get their hands on.
When you talked to Kingsley Suamataia out of BYU, you said that he was compared to a dancing bear. I need you to explain what exactly that was about.
So there are two guys that I talked to today that just charisma is off the charts here.
Big Riz guys.
Kingsley Suamataia is one of those.
Okay.
My favorite little nugget about Kingsley Suamataia, he was asked, like, these media availabilities go on for about 15 to 20 minutes, right? So you get in about 20-ish questions there.
Are birds real? Did you meet with the Houston Texans? Yes. That's most of what it is. Yeah.
So everyone would ask him a question, and the first thing out of his mouth, you know how in this kind of business, you're trying to always get rid of the ums and uhs.
Sure.
And that's like
filler
what
words.
You start with in at the start of your sentences. Kingsley starts every single answer with "oh shoot." He's like, "Oh shoot."
I love that.
Yeah, so every time he
that
would
flies
answer,
in Tennessee. I'm familiar with some folks that are just like that as well.
So
back
like
home,
you would ask him about his game, or
and
he'd be like, "Oh shoot, this and this," and then you ask him about this. I didn't ask this question, but I thought it was the best question to ask him. I believe I forget her name, but she does reporting with the San Francisco 49ers. She asked a scout has. Like I said in my tweet, compared him to a dancing grizzly bear. And he goes, "Oh, shoot. Yeah, that's me." Because he loves to dance. And he said, anytime I'm at home and music's on, I'm dancing in my kitchen. I'm dancing in the house. So, I mean, he's got that raw athleticism and that movement ability that is kind of a rare thing to find in a player, especially how he translates it to his game. So I think he was one of my favorite guys that I talked to today. Another one that really isn't realistic for the Titans, but I mean, between him and then also Jackson Powers Johnson out of out of Oregon.
Right.
Two of the more charismatic guys
Mhm.
that I talked to today. He this has no relevance to anything whatsoever, but
Okay.
apparently he has in Oregon there's a tap house and brewery
Mhm.
that named a sandwich after him, which
Okay.
is a double cheeseburger with I believe he said on it was bacon, pulled pork, queso, and mac and cheese.
Oh, you're
And he
making me.
says
I
he
mean,
fin- he
it's
finishes
dinner
it
time
every
here.
time.
I'm
Yeah.
dying now. Thanks a lot for that. But that sounds delicious.
Yeah, but he's a character, and he's going to go in that 15 to 25 range. And wherever he goes, I think he's a plug and play day one starter at the center position.
Absolutely. So just for reference for folks, those two tackles we just talked about, Patrick Paul, Kingsley Suamatea. Suamatea is 42nd overall on the consensus board. Patrick Paul at 50. Let's talk about one last guy before we get to the interview with Trevor Sikkema. You spoke to Amarius Mims today out of Georgia, a really, really fascinating tackle prospect because he's the kind of guy, if he had gone back to school this upcoming season, I'd be pretty confident he'd be the favorite to be the tackle one in next year's class. He has everything you're looking for from size to traits to movement ability. It's all there. What he's lacking is track record. He's played in 8 games in college, and so it's a really difficult evaluation from that standpoint. You just don't have a ton of snaps on paper of live reps. So he's going to go somewhere in the first round, we're expecting. Currently on the consensus board, he's 23rd overall. And he's somebody that I think where he ends up going ultimately is really volatile because of the fact that you can absolutely see a team convincing themselves, I don't care. This guy's got the stuff. 8 games is enough for me. We will take him high. And we think he's going to be the best tackle in this class. And some teams may say, we are not touching that with a 10-foot pole. It's just not proven.
And I think if you are a team that is higher on him and is going to take that chance, he answered that today. It was a question that was asked because that was the question to ask him. And his answer is he feels like he's ready because of the school he played at Georgia, because he transferred there and just throughout his time, shorter than most time at Georgia.
Sure.
He's playing against some of the greatest pass rushers and edge rushers that have come out of college in the past couple of years. You look at Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith, Devontae Wyatt, guys like that, that you're going up against every day in and out of practice. And then also just playing at such a high level in the SEC. I think that if there was a player who is going to be able to succeed at the next level like that, you'd have to play at Georgia, and you'd have to be a guy like Amarius Mims. The last thing I'll say about him is that when we're just talking about size of players today that I found very interesting, it goes Patrick Paul, and then also Amarius Mims is not much shorter than he is. I believe there is tweets out there. I think the most notable one that started a very interesting conversation today on Twitter about the height of sports journalists and things, what compared Amarius Mims and unfortunately, without him noticing, a certain Titans media member was the comparison.
Wasn't the bias, right?
It was. It was. So that kind of started this thing today on Twitter. But I mean, he is just a mountain of a man.
He is. It's really unfair to Tobias or anybody else standing in that photo. I know if I'd been standing,
if I'm in that photo,
we'd have looked just as silly.
Just as
silly. Yeah. It's one of those things where you go back and you find high school footage of Amarius Mims, and I've found some of this. He looks like a high school senior playing on the middle school JV team. It's just really, really silly how big a difference there was. And Cody in the comments asking, did Kieran Amagaji, I believe is his name, participate today? He did. I don't believe you spoke with him, but
mostly because Joel was going at the same time.
Fair enough. Cody, lucky for you, though, we did touch on Kieran as a prospect that we mentioned in the interview we're about to listen to as a possible day 2, day 3 guy that could play inside or outside. So JT, thank you for your insight on that. That was fantastic. If you guys are still with us or if you're just joining us, make sure you're subscribed at Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. And without further ado, let's get to some clips, JT. We spoke to Trevor Sikkema, head of PFF draft I don't think his official title. I really should
He's
get this down.
Senior draft analyst.
Senior draft analyst. Thank you. There we go. He's the draft guy, right, at PFF. So he knows what he's talking about, and he's watched these guys. He was kind enough to sit down with us yesterday here at the Combine, and we asked him a couple of questions. We've got 3 clips real quick to share with you. The first of which involves a little bit of a philosophy question. The Titans, of course, need a lot of help at a lot of positions this year, and they don't have a ton of draft picks. 8 picks, not bad on paper, but when 3 of them are in the 7th round and you're lacking a 3rd round pick, you got to pick and choose your spots unless you choose to liquidate one of those picks and move down in the draft, get some more throws at the dartboard. I asked Trevor about the philosophy surrounding the choice for a team like this Titans team who needs a lot of help, whether or not they should move or stick and pick a player. Here's what he had to say. All right, here with Trevor Sikkema, lead draft analyst for PFF. Trevor, thank you for sitting down with us. First question, we're going to kind of scattershot it, talking mostly about the Titans, but the first is a draft philosophy question. When a team like the Titans needs so many pieces at so many different positions, and you're in a top 10 pick situation, what do you value more in terms of getting a can't-miss guy, cornerstone piece, versus potentially liquidating, getting more dart throws later on in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that will exist every year for so many different teams. You know, I think the teams that are selecting the top half of the drafts, particularly in the top 10, most of them have a lot more than just one hole to fill. Sometimes it's just quarterback, and the reason why you're so bad is because you don't have that quarterback spot figured out. But for a lot of other teams, it does come down to a lot of different holes. It can be playmakers, it can be trenches, things like that. And Tennessee's definitely, specifically in a situation where I think that they need help in a lot of different areas, so I could see the allurement of, hey, let's trade back a little bit here. But as much as this is kind of like a cop-out answer, it just depends what the price is. You always want to have the phones open, and you always want to be willing to hear what somebody's willing to give you, because you never know. There might be a deal that you just go, okay, that's way better than the player that we're going to get at 7 or whatever it is. Right. But you know, it's the way that I say it is this. The most important part about the NFL draft is picking good football players. The better odds that you have to get good football players come the higher in the draft order that you are. Sure. And I mean, there are still guys that go number 1 overall that bust. But a lot of the great players in the league that stick around a long time that are franchise cornerstone guys, they traditionally come within that first round. And the higher you get, the better chance that you have. So that is the main name of the game. But there is that little mini game of like what Arizona Cardinals did last year. They were sitting at number 3. They had Paris Johnson Jr. probably as the guy that they were going to take anyways. They get to number 3. He's on the board. They have the opportunity to go from 3 to 12, then 12 back up to 6, and they get the guy that they would have got at 3 all along, and they get an extra first-round pick out of it. Right. That's the dream. It doesn't often work out like that. And so if you can guarantee me a situation where a team's getting a future first-round pick and the player that they wanted all along, sure, it's great. But there's no doubt about it that any time that you throw in risk, it gets a little dangerous.
The next question we had for Trevor was, if the Titans don't go tackle in round 1, or shoot, if they want 2 tackles at the top of this draft, and early day 2 pick, 38 overall, they're looking for a tackle. Kingsley Suamatea, Patrick Paul, 2 guys we've talked about. He introduces a 3rd name. Let's listen to what he had to say on those guys. It may be a matter of taking receiver at the first round and going with a tackle in the second, early in the second. Are any of those guys that are in that kind of range, you know, Patrick Paul, Kingsley Suamatea, do any of those guys stand out to you as potential value picks early in the second round? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, Suamatea is one of those guys who I liked more than I thought that I was going to on tape. When I first initially watched him, I was like, man, I get it. Former 5-star, moves very, very well. Yes. But he just didn't really, like, him and Tyler Guyton kind of have the same problem. They're both incredible athletes. They don't really block. They kind of just push. So they just they just shove a lot. And it's like, man, if you're going to succeed at the NFL level, you got to get your hands at the right spot. You got to get it underneath. You got to get it with leverage, and you've got to be able to maintain blocks. And these guys just don't do it a lot on their tape right now. Sure. But they're young, they're athletic. I think that they are learning to be able to do that. So he is somebody who's very intriguing to me, who has that, I think, offensive tackle type of a ceiling. Another guy that I'm really intrigued on here is Kieran Amagashi, the offensive tackle from Yale. And he's somebody who played a little bit of guard, played a little bit of left tackle. He's so much better than his competition on his tape at the Ivy League level that it's really hard to tell, because he's very clearly a future NFLer playing at the Ivy League level. You just go, okay, what kind of an NFL player are you? He's somebody who I might like better at guard, but his pass protection abilities at at tackle were so good over the last 2 years, I'd almost let him fail a tackle before I put him at guard. So he's somebody who maybe a similar situation to how we viewed Peter Skoronski last year. And I know that they kicked Skoronski inside immediately. I might have given him that chance at tackle instead of just kicking him inside. But like those are two players who
I've only been saying that since they did it.
Thank you.
I'm glad somebody.
All right, I didn't want to. If you were on the other side of things, I didn't want to be too abrasive on your own show. But yeah, I would have put him into offensive tackle first. But
interesting. That last part was, the important part was the beginning of the video, but the end of it was just, I think, a little food for thought. A little vindication, maybe.
Zach Lyons over at Football and Other Sports thinks it's planned. It was not planned.
It was not planned. You can tell on my face that is unbridled, unadulterated joy and surprise as to that vindication.
We may never know. Maybe that
we're never going to. No, I'm only. It
might be the hot read moon landing.
I'm only halfway still on this train. I've mostly given up because he's never going to play a tackle. But we have one more clip from Trevor to share with you guys, and this is asking him, like, what would you do at 7, right? Receiver, tackle. What's the math there to you based on these guys that are likely to be available at 7 overall? Here's what Trevor Sikkema of PFF had to say. Yeah. Well, if they go line in the first round, they're in that range of, is it Alt, is it Olu? It seems like the consensus is Alt is the slightly better prospect, but if they were to trade back, or if Alt goes to the Chargers at 5 and isn't there for them, and they are really set on offensive line at 7, how big of a step down from Alt is it to Olu? And are people maybe overlooking how good a prospect he is?
No, I don't think it's that big of a step down. I really don't. I think that Alt is a really rock solid offensive tackle prospect, the guy that could play in this league for 10 years as long as he's healthy enough to do so. I really do. I don't think he's this can't miss type of offensive tackle prospect, like he's this generational offensive tackle guy. I do have him comfortably offensive tackle 1 because of how high his floor is.
I was about to say, it's just a really high floor.
He does have a really high floor, but every time I say high floor, people go like, oh, that must mean he doesn't have a high ceiling. That's not what I mean. Sure. It's just that's the part that I think you emphasize the most is I can't see this guy busting in any sort of situation.
Is there a case that Fashanu has a higher ceiling?
Yeah, there is, because I think that when you look at Fashanu's movement skills, they're extremely impressive. What he does in pass protection is very, very impressive. How he's able to move, the balance, the handwork, just the length that he can cover, the size, all that kinds of stuff is just well into Olu's advantage. And so pass protection is obviously such a major part of why you would covet a guy and draft a guy that highly in the draft. So, Olu needs to anchor better, needs to play with strength better, needs to not expose his chest as much as he does right now, needs to understand where to put his hands. And, I can understand, like, he's got some low hands, it feels like, through his reps. And, maybe that's due to the fact that he likes to, shoot the hands up, creating that leverage, getting inside. And, I understand the technique and everything, but sometimes his hands are so low that he gives away that chest. And we saw that in the Ohio State game. So, I think all of these offensive tackles are really great. But I'll say this, just as to build off of that question. If Tennessee is in on wide receiver, even as equally as offensive tackle, I wouldn't entertain moving down from 7. Like, I would make sure that I get one of Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, or Rome Odunze. Right. If you're that in on wide receiver, I wouldn't move down. For as good as I think a lot of other wide receivers are in this class, I'd get one of them at 7.
There's a significant drop
on the flip side, I wouldn't have that big of an issue of moving down from 7 to somewhere in the middle of the first round to still get a really good offensive lineman that you're bringing in, just maybe not Joe Alt. So that's kind of the way that I would go about it. Wouldn't be moving down if wide receivers the target.
So are you seeing it as less of a drop-off from those top 2 tackles to the next couple guys than from the top receivers too?
Yes. And I think that just is more of a compliment to how good I think those top 3 wide receivers are.
So that was Trevor Sikkema, PFF lead draft analyst. Thanks a ton to him for giving us some of his time. And thanks to Danny Kelly, who we showed a big chunk of our interview with him on the show yesterday. He is the lead draft analyst over at The Ringer. Both of those guys, full interviews with questions we did not include on the show, will be available on Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page, right where you're watching this, in the next day or 2. I'd say by Monday morning, they'll be available for you, and we'll make sure to post those on social media and all that good stuff. But we spoke to Trevor about Bill Callahan and what kind of impact he can have. We spoke to Danny Kelly about how he actually thinks Olu Fashanu.
It's going to be tough.
The next 3 months, drink every time I mess that up. And you might need to go to the hospital. Yeah. Ola Fashanu is a guy that he thinks may actually be the better tackle in this class than Joe Alt. And his opinion is one that I value. I think he makes some good points. All of that and more in those interviews. So check out those in full. A perfect transition to what we're going to talk about now with these these wide receivers these offensive wide receivers, not to be confused with the defensive ones. They tested today at Lucas Oil Stadium. And we got a question in the comments from Kenneth, who asks, is Adonai Mitchell at 7 crazy town? Is it way too high? The short answer is yes. And Kenneth, I know, I get it. It's easy today to get caught up in the hype of the testing and the certified freak athletes out there, and just like some of these insane numbers they're putting up. It is mouth-watering to consider that kind of speed or that kind of size or that kind of power on your team in a role that you know they need. You can't let it dictate that kind of move, right? And there's a reason why, like Trevor says there, he would not entertain moving down from 7 if the Titans are most interested in a receiver, because getting one of those top 3 guys in Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, and Malik Neighbors is of much import as to not suffer that drop off from those 3 guys to guys like Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Troy Franklin, Xavier Legette, Brian Thomas Jr., all of those guys that we're going to talk about here in a second. They are good receivers, and they're going to be value. A number of those guys are going to be awesome receivers in the league. I'm sure of it, just because of how talented they are and how many are going to go in the second round. And it may very well be a AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel situation from that 2019 draft, where so many guys came off the board in the second and third round. And it was a big boon to a big benefit rather to the teams that drafted them. Let's talk about some of the testing numbers these guys did have and why we approach these testing numbers. The combine process is more of a tiebreaker exercise than it is a set your clock to what we hear and see. Some ties may have been broken from some of these receivers who maybe, were considered, that bunch of, again, Brian Thomas Jr. and Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell and Troy Franklin and Xavier Legette and not quite Malachi Corley, Lad McConkey. Like, all of those guys are like, you may see 8 of them going 10 picks at the beginning of the second round. It's really not crazy. And so the little things we saw today, I think they may go a long way as to who goes when and where and why.
Yeah, no, I agree with you here. Before we start, some of these guys, we actually have a lot of questions pouring into the chat. Great. Here. Derek says first, he says, I want a Dunze, but I would take the Titans finding some way to get, and he prefaces or comes back and says Xavier Worthy as a consolation prize today because of that combine record.
I'd like to push back on that a little bit. Yeah.
Here with that, and I think that kind of translates to who we're going to talk about first, Xavier Worthy, who 4.21. What was the official time? It is now official. He is now holds the record for the 40-yard in the combine. Mm-hmm. When you look at his RAS score, he has a 9.37. Composite explosion grade is an elite grade here with a 41 vertical and a 10.11 broad jump. And then his composite speed grade is also elite with a perfect RAS 10 of 4.2240.
4.2140.
4.2140.
Don't short the man his record.
And I mean, 10-yard split and 20-yard splits as well. 1.5 unofficial 10-yard split. It's absolutely crazy.
So I see we have 2 really great questions from Gershon and our buddy Sean in the comments. Gershon and Sean. We're going to get to both of those. So y'all stick tight real quick, but I want to address the A.D. Mitchell, the Xavier Worthy conversation here, because a lot of folks are going to be mesmerized by what they saw from him today, and for good reason, because on the surface, receiver run fast seems like a good thing. Receiver go fast, good for a football team.
Also say, we're not going to talk about him, but Tez Walker also falls into
also receiver run fast. But if receiver run fast, but receiver not play football good, receiver not good at football, is the caveman way of approaching this. But from a actual data historical perspective, there are 2 big things that I think you have to consider when it comes to Xavier Worthy in particular, and it is how crazy speedy guys have fared in the NFL and how guys of his size, in particular his weight, 165 pounds, have fared in the NFL. So let's start with the speed, right? Our buddy Scott Barrett over at Fantasy Points, he put together this chart of all of the fastest receiver scores at the receiver speeds rather at the combine since I think ever. Yeah, since the combine began. So whenever that was. And the top 23 guys are on this list. JT, do you want to guess of the top 23 fastest receivers in combine history, how many of them have at least one career 1,000-yard receiving season?
I want to say maybe like 4. Like, is there 4 or 5?
You're in the right ballpark. It's one. Just one guy.
Okay. Cool.
It was Santana Moss, drafted in 2001. He had, I believe, at least I think he only had one, but maybe he had a couple 1,000-yard receiving seasons. The rest, no. They were guys that were more track star than great NFL receivers. And not all these guys were busts, but were they first, second round, cornerstone, build an offense around this receiver type of guy? They really weren't. And so I think that points to, when a guy is crazy speedy, typically that guy, and I don't, not everybody's the same. Some people are exceptions to the rule, but it seems like the rule is if you're really, really fast, you may be more of a one-trick pony than the kind of versatile receiver. Maybe gimmicky is the right word, kind of gadgety. The really fast guys tend to be gadgety. And if you read off some of the guys on this list, of course, we know John Ross, Henry Ruggs may very well could have been a 1,000-yard receiver, but we'll never know that. Marquise Goodwin, Tyquan Thornton, Darius Hayward-Bay, Paris Campbell, Old Man Valus Jones, Curtis Samuel, Will Fuller, Andy Isabella, Travis Benjamin. It's the kind of guys that we were crazy about this time of year, and they just didn't pan out. So that's one reason to not be sold entirely because of the speed. Now, the more important thing to me, the weight. And I know the NFL is trending towards, I think, a great saying, weight is not your fate. It's becoming less and less important for guys to be bulkier at the receiver position to these teams. Like, it seems like their thresholds are lowering. And a guy like Tank Dell last year is a phenomenal example of that. 2 years previous, I believe, Devonta Smith, also a great example of that. Two really, really, really slender guys who have found success in the NFL. Tank Dell's the one that people point to most and say he was exactly 165 pounds too. Yes, this is true. One, he's the exception to the rule, and I'm about to prove why. Two, for the awesome season he had, he also didn't finish the season, right? Like he sustained a season-ending injury, and I'm not relising in that. I was devastated when he did, because from a fantasy perspective, it kind of sucked. But it also sucked to watch such a good player go down on a really exciting team. And whether or not his injury had to do with his weight and his size, like that, I'm not going to speculate on that. My point being, just in terms of general durability, a bigger guy is important. And so there was a list floating around on Twitter today of guys, and this was arguing the opposite of what I'm arguing, that weight is not your fate. Here's a list of all the guys that are 185 pounds or lighter who, since 2000, I believe, have had 1,000-yard receiving seasons. And I think it was like 24, 25 guys on this list. I think that list is really misrepresenting what we have here in Xavier Worthy, because there's a really big difference between 185 and 165. 20 pounds goes a long way. And so I went through that list, JT, and I pulled all the guys that are north of 175 out. So the 175 to 185 range I pulled out and said, okay, all the receivers under 175. Xavier Worthy's 10 pounds lighter than that, but I gave him 175 as the threshold. How many 175 or lighter receivers in NFL history, modern NFL history, have had 1,000-yard receiving seasons? That list of 24, 25 guys was cut to one. And that one guy was Devonta Smith, who was a Heisman winner, the definition of an exception to the rule. So I'm not saying that his weight is his fate. I'm not saying he can't be a Tank Dell exception. And I'm not saying that speed can't really aid in him becoming a valuable asset to a team. But I am saying buyer beware, because the two things that are most defining about him, his weight and his speed, are things that I think can get you in a lot of trouble if you're an NFL team looking for a dynamic wide receiver to add to your team.
Yeah, and summing all of that, as you said, in more caveman talk. AC 720 comes in and says receiver get injured when receiver fast and receiver
Well, I
not
think
great at football.
you tweeted out as we left. You said Xavier Worthy is fast, but he will break.
He will break.
He will break.
And I
And
think
we're not hoping he does.
I'm not.
I hope that
just-
he miraculously never gets injured.
It's gonna be-
Genuinely, I do.
we will both be crow on that, and we're happy to, because we like when there are explosive players in the league to talk about and talk
Yes.
with, and maybe he does end up on the Titans, and that will, as Derek says, he's thinking with the second round pick if they go tackle in the first. But he says he does respect your analysis of that side, though. So there you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's tough to kind of consider him an exception before it happens.
Right.
I think.
Can we get to Gershon's question?
Yeah.
He says that Teron Davenport, our buddy, very high on Keon Coleman. I know that he is. I know that TD knows Keon pretty well. He spent some one-on-one time with him this week. I don't know. I don't think I'm giving away something I shouldn't give away. It's not like he worked for him or anything, but he got some one-on-one time with Keon today, set something up special because TD's a pro reporter and he has a connect there. And so he got to know the kid, and he's even more fond of the makeup of this guy, it sounds like, than he was before. Keon had an interesting day. Do you want to kind of sum up for folks what his day looked like? Because it started a real bummer, and then we saw him do some actual football things, and folks like me who are higher on Keon than you, we got roped right back in.
Yeah, I mean, and it's such a tricky slope, right? Because you start off the day with the 40-yard dash, and he comes in at 4.61, which is not great. His burst is fine.
Sure.
The burst, the 10-yard split of the 40 is fine for him. It's that
long speed.
It's that long speed, maintaining that
Right.
that he didn't really show. He showed us off and on in college that you saw today doesn't really work. But I mean, his size and explosion grade, he has a 38 vertical, 10 foot or 10.7 broad jump here. He has that, and you see that with the gauntlet drill today,
Right.
where he, despite not running super fast in the 40, he comes into the gauntlet drill and is the fastest in that drill, and he's outside of the Wonder Boy Lad McConkey is
Right.
also the most confined and compact in that, which is also a big part of that drill in the gauntlet. So I think that there are two different sides to this, and the answer that I keep coming back to is I don't know what to do with him.
It's risky, right? I can imagine some folks are sitting at home saying, what does that mean? What did all you just say mean? So let me add some context to it. No, you're good. You laid out the raw numbers. So let's add some context to it. The reason why the long speed in particular, but his speed in general, was something folks were really looking to see him show off today, was because he's already coming in just from a tape study perspective with some separation concerns and with some contested catch concerns. That's just something where neither of those things are keys to his game necessarily. And so if you pair that with some speed, you can make up for it. But if you just don't have that gear, that concerns a lot of people. So that's the reason why that was concerning. As for why the gauntlet drill, that's the drill where the receiver runs down the baseline of the yardage marker and turns back and forth, catches the ball here, catches the ball here, catches the ball here as they're running. That kind of demonstrates ability to address the ball as it's being thrown your way. And playing speed, right? You hear play speed is different from track speed. And with a guy like him, maybe not every receiver is out there in the gauntlet drill running as fast as they can, but I think how fast they run is like a muscle memory indicator of how quickly they tend to play. And with Keon Coleman averaging the fastest speed of any of the receivers who ran the gauntlet today, as well as running the gauntlet. And who's a good example of somebody that didn't keep their line very straight? Troy Franklin out of Oregon. You're zigzagging as you go. As this ball over here comes my way, I fade away from it, and then I fade back away the other way, and fade back, and it's not attacking the ball. You're not staying on course. The flight of the ball as you're preparing for it, kind of bracing for impact, it changes your trajectory. That's not something teams are looking for in their receivers. They don't want that. They want you to be confident in your route and for the trajectory of the ball not to affect the way that you are running it. And so that's why, again, folks, just from a numbers perspective, aren't crazy about Keon Coleman. From a raw data perspective, that he didn't give you a lot to hope for today. But from an eye test perspective, like that boy nice enjoyers like myself can't quite let go of the fact that boy looked nice out there a little bit. And we remember September and October when Keon Coleman was tearing it up at FSU and doing incredible things almost every Saturday. And so ultimately, I'm in the same place as you. I'm scared. He's scary. I don't know. I still think teams are higher on him than maybe the analytics community is, and I would not be surprised if he's a late first round pick. I wouldn't be super shocked at this point, though, if he falls into the second round and maybe he's even available for the Titans at 38. What I do know is this. While he may have left it ambiguous as to whether or not he's a first or second round pick, I think there were some guys, transition to Sean's question, that did solidify, and again, like this tiebreaker thing, made it much more clear who we think will and won't be a first round pick versus a second round pick. And I think that takes us to AD Mitchell, who had a really nice day of testing. And it sounds like every single mock draft Monday mock you read coming up in a couple of days is going to include an AD Mitchell in the 20s.
Yeah, as we're talking about him as well, I mean, he, I believe, was he top 10 out of all of the receivers ever?
I believe he was 10th, 10th best RAS score out of 3,060 some odd receivers in history.
I mean,
so.
he is living up to those. He's living up to those comps of CeeDee Lamb, like those comps you can see in his play today. He was one of those guys who I think, interestingly enough, in his 3-cone drill, he was having a hard time with that because it's just one that's so hard to do and
keep your traction,
keep the traction, especially on this Indianapolis turf,
the best turf in the land. Yeah.
But the way he was extending his strides in that was something that I caught that no other person who was doing that drill was really able to replicate. And I think that's a big part of his game that I think is really interesting. I know you have some of the numbers up on him as well.
Right. So just some context on his size. And if you could find the RAS score final for me, I'd love to read that out as well. 6'2" and a quarter, 205 pounds, 11'4" broad jump, 39.5-inch vertical.
997.
997 overall on the RAS. And so he ran a 4.35 unofficial 40-yard dash. So he can fly as well as having a bigger body in that way. Had 11 touchdowns to just 1 drop in 2023. I'd imagine he's a first rounder. And on top of all of that, you hear all the time, and you heard yesterday, if you were tuned into the show, listening to our interview with Danny Kelly, talking about him a little bit. He's kind of this is kind of like a JJ McCarthy. He just wins, like intangible. Not sure if it actually matters, but there's something to it. Maybe AD Mitchell's he's just a big game player. He's played in 5. Yeah, make sure I got this right. 5 college football playoff games over the past 3 seasons. AD Mitchell has. He has scored a touchdown in all 5 of those games. So he steps up in the big moments, especially. And whether or not you think that matters, the fact that he didn't shy away from those big moments at the very least, I think does speak to the kind of player that he is. And I would imagine he's a first rounder as of today. I think a lot of folks are going to have him as their wide receiver 4 or 5 in this class.
Yeah, I think so too.
If not higher, for that matter.
He's going to continue his elevation up boards, where I think that he is one of those guys. It's going to be very frustrating if he's there for the Kansas City Chiefs and they pick him and it's like, how did
I that's where I'm mocking him right now. And I think he's the 32nd pick. The Chiefs get him and everybody is furious. It's either him or Ladd McConkey, because both of those guys had great days. And I could see either of them being a Chief and everybody being furious that they get to play with Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah. And then also another guy here,
sure.
Brian Thomas on this. I have 2 guys here.
Okay.
One guy who I think solidified his stock today in the
first
round, and a guy who I think is solely now in the second round conversation.
Sure.
The first one also has an RAS score of 997 as well. Weirdly enough, it's Brian Thomas Jr. Ran a 4.34 today.
The top of this wide receiver class is stupid good.
It's stupidly insane.
I have my questions about the depth. The top of it is so
the
good.
First 6, it's going to be hard to rank them. I think we're going to.
I think the first 8 might be difficult.
But he's a guy who I know for sure will go in that first round. I think he could even inch up into the top 15 if a team likes him enough.
Sure.
But he's going there. A guy
I think 15 at the Colts.
Or 15 at Saints or something like that.
I saw somebody that I follow that does the Colts. Our buddy Zach Hicks, who we've had on the show, talking about how he fits Chris Ballard's draft profile to a T. Wouldn't be shocked if he's the kind of guy they go in the first round.
Even if the Bengals were to trade T. Higgins and try to replace him, Brian Thomas Jr. could be a very big answer there if he falls further into the draft, a Buffalo Bills would
now
be,
that we're talking through it, I kind of think he's going to be a teens pick. Like, I think top 20 is where he's going to end up going.
If he does, though, I think Buffalo runs that card up there to take him. Absolutely.
Yes.
But he's going in the first round. A guy who I think really does not have a chance to go in the first round anymore is Troy Franklin today.
Agreed. Out of Oregon. Yep.
Out of Oregon. You said it best. He's just kind of in his own head about his hands right now.
I think he's a head case with those hands. You know, he had the highest, I believe the highest, definitely amongst the, let's just say the highest amongst these top receivers by a country mile drop rate in 2023. Something like 10% of his passes, or his targets rather, were dropped. And today he just continued to bobble the ball and drop the ball. And we talked with Danny Kelly yesterday on the show again about how that wasn't the case for him 2 seasons ago, 3 seasons ago. In fact, he had one of the best drop rates in the league, was not dropping the ball ever. And now he's in this rut he can't get himself out of. Athletically, he's got the stuff, man, right? He's an 8.53 athlete, not the best size in the world, but ran a 4.41 40-yard dash, nothing to sniff at. Like, he's a strong contender from an athletic profile standpoint. But the actual play on the field, the ability to be a sure-handed player and make plays with the ball, he just continues to bring it into question.
Yeah, I would agree there too. Landon asks, and this was a guy I was just going to bring up as an odds and ends guy, and I'm glad he really did, because now he has a place in the show.
There we
How about
go.
Johnny Wilson?
Wide receiver Johnny Wilson?
Yes.
Tight end Johnny Wilson?
Well,
Mountain of a
we'll have
man
to
Johnny
see.
Wilson? Yeah.
Personally,
Out of FSU, by the way.
I think out of FSU, I think he made that case harder today because of his 40-yard dash. I mean,
no, he was requested to work out at tight end.
Yes.
Okay, just making sure.
He is 6'6", and I think 3/4 at 231, and the man ran a 4.53. I think before we were going, I think we were like
4.8, high 4.7s, right? Yeah.
On that there. I mean, the dude just continues to prove time and time again that, and I think even at the level, it's an uphill battle for him. I still am not knocking that, but I think it makes the discussion a little bit harder there. He was a guy who stood out to me as well, just because he has that speed. The get off is probably the worst part of his game. 1.58, 10-yard split. But I mean, that getting there in 4.53 at that size, you'd have to think if that he can translate well to the NFL level. You bring in that guy with the contested catch ability that he could probably bring. And I think he's a day 2 guy for sure. Whether he is a late second, early third, that's yet to be determined. But I think there is no way that he gets out of the 3rd round.
Yeah, a couple other guys that we didn't talk about today, but were interesting from their combine performance. Xavier Legette had a pretty impressive day.
He's a guy who I think his stock was absolutely in a free fall, and then today he makes himself a very interesting case. I think.
Ryan Flournoy out of Mississippi something?
Great question.
It's a smaller school, and I can never get it right. I think it's something Mississippi, but you'll look that up for me. And then Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky, I believe, right? The Hilltoppers, Malachi Corley? Yes. Now I'm really second-guessing anything. Where'd Rome Odunze go to school? Caleb Williams? I don't know.
Ryan Flournoy went to Southeast Missouri State.
Southeast Missouri, excuse me. Wrong M state. Okay, so Southeast Missouri, the proud whatever they are. Ryan Flournoy is a product of Southeast Missouri and had a really nice day for himself. Any thoughts on either of those guys besides just to keep in mind as potential early day 3 picks for the Titans?
Okay, we're back. I think it froze for a second there, but I think we're good now.
Okay.
But yeah, we were talking about Ryan Flournoy, who I think in the 40 there really showed himself off there. Malachi Corley is a very interesting one because there were also talks today about him trying out as a running back, which I think starts to put him even more in that Deebo Samuel comp kind of way. It'd be interesting to see how teams would do that. Those are 2 guys who I think were not on my radar. There's especially now on my radar as well. Another guy, 2 guys actually, and we continue this entire discussion all week about 2 players on the same exact team. Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson are 2 guys. I think out of the 2, I think Cornelius Johnson had the better day today.
Yes.
I think he made
crazy athlete.
Strides in his game today, which make it We back?
Hello? I think we're back.
I think we're back.
All right.
Are we
Sorry
back?
about that. I don't know how much you missed. We had pretty much finished up everything.
Yeah. Wait, can you just check on there?
Yeah,
just
let me double check on
full
here.
clarity. I'm pretty surprised how we made it this entire week off of hotspot.
It only fell apart at the very last second. Yeah, we came to our Airbnb and the internet didn't work, which we're only here to do internet shows. So we've been working on our phone hotspots this whole time. So hopefully,
It's the first time. Derek says welcome back, so we're here. So I guess we can keep
awesome.
going. Let's just keep going.
Let's just keep going. Although.
Cornelius Johnson did himself in that round 2.
Let's wrap this up.
Yeah, let's wrap this up though. But yeah, I think those are 2 other guys. We're gonna come back next week and
we'll have a lot more thoughts on these receivers. Yeah, we'll get out of here now before the internet croaks on us again. Thank you guys for tuning in live with us all week long. It's been a real pleasure. It's been a ton of fun here at Indy. We're exhausted, ready to be done. We hope that we brought you guys some value this week, covering a Titan-specific angle on the Combine. Make sure you subscribe to the show at Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. It's very, very helpful to us. It's the number one thing you can do for us if you want to thank us for the show that we put on. Hit that subscribe button. Thank you in advance for doing that. Make sure you follow us at Hot Read Pod on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll be back a regular talking about free the draft, all these good things. Until then, for producer JT, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. This has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll talk to you back in Nashville.